So good to see everyone. It is our last book lesson. We still have one next week, but I'm going to write that up and I'll have printouts for you next week when we look at the connections between what happened here and look at how it points ahead to Christ in the New Testament. For tonight, I'll tell you what we're doing a little bit. We are going to pick up with Solomon. So last week, Solomon had a phenomenal beginning to his reign. Everything was prospering. Everything was just going great. We had a lot of trade going. There was peace after he made some necessary violent steps. So today we're going to see... Yeah, thanks. Today we're going to look at the rest of his reign, which is still mostly good. I kind of set it up like it was going to be a train wreck last week. It's still mostly good. And we're going to look in the book for a bit. We have a quick field trip to the TV over here that'll have us all... I wish I could set it up like somewhere so we could all just sit and watch it. But I have like a 3-minute video that would be very helpful for the discussion tonight. You may or may not be able to watch it. It's a 3D rendering, so yeah, that's probably safe. We have some motion sickness issues. But for everyone else who doesn't have those problems, it will be very helpful. And then we'll dig into a lot of scripture that finishes up Solomon's reign. But first, as always, let's open up in prayer. Lord, I thank you for the day. I thank you for everyone who was able to make it out. I just pray that you would be with us during this study. Pray that you would show us what we need to see, that would just help us know you better, understand you and your word, and have a clearer idea of what our walk with you can and should look like. So I pray you be with us during this time. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. Okay. In your book, if you don't know, we're on page 109. And in your Bible, when we get there, we'll be in 1 Kings chapter 6. And just a heads up, like last year, or last season, I don't know what, yeah, it was last year technically. For the last week, I'll have donuts, coffee, tea again. Not going to Dunkin' Donuts, I'm saying that right off the bat. I didn't realize they're absurdly expensive when we went last time, and I got 2 dozen of them. But I will get good donuts, no worries, no worries. Okay, page 109 in your book. Let's just talk about the first 2 questions. So, question 1, describe a time when you purchased something that you thought would make you happy for the rest of your life. Maybe that's a tall order, but I think you know what I mean. Do you ever have a purchase or something like that was just like, man, that was going to be the thing?
Cheesesteak stuff, like,
Yeah, but that's pretty temporary. You're talking about something.
Well, it can be anything, I guess. The question is a long-lasting one. But question 2 is the immediate follow-up of, how long did that enthusiasm last? Probably about once you finished the hoagie, or the cheesesteak.
Your car, and then when it burnt down.
Yeah. Yep. Finally, you got that nice car.
I don't know, do you ever think anything like makes you happy for the rest of your life?
How's this fun?
Except your wife maybe, I would like it.
And question 2, how long did the enthusiasm last?
Well, we do pay.
Nowadays they're free, right, Ron?
But you do pay for the rest of the life. Yeah, there's that, right?
So I think we're all familiar with the idea. Even if you would never actually say like, oh, this purchase or this decision, this is going to make me, like, I don't think I've ever said that in my life. Like, this thing is going to make me happy for the rest of my life. I don't know that I've ever consciously said that. But we all have those things where we're like, man, if we just get this. You mentioned, Greg, a house. Like, for a lot of people, that's a huge step in life. Sometimes the car is that as well. Like, I remember your first car that you got, that was your ticket. And mine broke down within 4.5 months. So there tends to be a rollback effect. And even if nothing goes wrong with it, like, your status quo changes. So now it's just like, oh yeah, I got this house, or, you talked about, like, jokingly about marriage, but everyone knows there's the honeymoon period. And then after that, we have very high divorce rates in this country. Clearly there's a time where people go, this isn't everything I thought it would be. Or maybe we're looking for it to be more than it possibly could be. So we'll dig into this concept in the life of Solomon as it carries on. Okay, on page 110, Solomon's greatest achievement, I think you could say, arguably, is what he was born to do. What God didn't allow his father David to do. Solomon was going to build the temple. So, page 110, construction of the temple. Solomon began his major life work of building the temple of the Lord. His father had envisioned this great complex and provided specific architectural plans for its construction. In addition, he had arranged for the acquisition of many of the building materials and the financing. Solomon needed vast quantities of Lebanese fir and cedar lumber, so he contacted his father's friend Hiram, king of Tyre, to supply this lumber. Logs were transported from the city of Tyre down the Mediterranean coast to Joppa and hauled inland to Jerusalem, a total distance of 125 miles. So that's something we didn't really hit on much in the life of David, that once he's told that he's not going to be the one to build the temple, but his son will, he still does what he can lawfully within God's will to provide for it. So he starts setting aside funds for that future project. He starts setting aside material for Solomon later to use as he builds the temple, although more has to be brought in. Skip a paragraph, and we see Solomon had 30,000 men divided into 3 work crews of 10,000 men each. Each work crew rotated between working 1 month in Lebanon and working 2 months in their own fields in Israel. 150,000 men worked in the quarries north of Jerusalem, cutting, dressing, and transporting huge stones, most of which measured 2 feet by 15 feet. These stones were completely prepared so that there were no sounds of cutting at the temple site. There were 153,600 aliens were conscripted to work. This method of drafting slave labor would later prove to be distasteful to the Hebrews because of the way it was administered. So they're glossing over a lot here. So you end up with, even among the Israelites, conscripted labor. So those initial 30,000 men we talked about into 3 different divisions, they didn't really have a choice. They were like, okay, you're going to go to Lebanon, you're going to help that to get the cedar to us. And they were doing a good work that all of Israel wanted to do, but this ends up being a point of contention because 1 out of every 3 months you're not home, you're doing work for the king. And it seems like there's a very large foreign labor force that is like some sort of, the book says slave, some sort of, I don't know if it's slave as we think of it, or indentured servants, or again, people who don't necessarily have a total choice in what they're doing. So there are some points of contention here that the book kind of is just glossing, but this becomes a big deal. We won't see this, but this becomes a big deal after Solomon's reign, because Solomon has this big, glorious, prosperous reign. But you find out after his death that, this was actually very taxing on the people, and tax issues and how you're going to run the government going forward becomes a big problem with Solomon's son. So it's a good thing, but there's a lot to it. There's a lot going on. But what I want to do now is I want to take you to the television, because I have a video that is a 3D rendering of the temple. So if you were to read about the temple in 1 Kings, it's just chapters of measurements, and there are no pictures. So as helpful as that would be, it's just chapters of this thing was this long by that long. So I think 3D rendering is very helpful. There's no dialogue in it, so I can explain to you what we're looking at, and I think that'll make a lot of sense. And if you want to come and look at the TV.
So this is a 3D rendering of the Temple of Solomon. So the altar that sat out front is the bronze altar, the brazen altar. That's where the animal sacrifices were done. It's up on a platform right outside the temple. That was done before the priest would enter in. What they're zooming down on now is called the brass sea. So it's a giant water container. It's massive, and it's held up by 12 bulls that represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And then somewhere on it there's a water spout so that you can empty water from the brass sea into these smaller containers that are kept by the side of the temple. And you notice they have ox, lion, bear type imagery that relate to the cherubs. And then there are 2 pillars that stand outside the temple. And as you get to the door of the temple, it's filled with images of palm trees, fruit trees, cherubs, and blossoming flowers. Now, inside the temple, it's mostly wood, just covered top to bottom with gold. Okay, so there is very intricate pattern work all on the walls. Again, cherubs, fruit trees, there's blossoming flowers. It's all very intricate. There are menorahs on each side. Lines both sides of the temple. There are high windows up on the 2nd story, so no one just walking down below could see in. The columns are covered with intricate carvings. This is the table of showbread. This is the type of bread David would have eaten when he went to the tabernacle about several weeks back. Then you have the altar of incense. It's right in front of this Holy of Holies. This is where the incense would represent the prayers of the saints. So then they go up the staircase and through the set of gold doors, because back here was the Holy of Holies. This was the place that was so sacred that the high priest could only enter once a year on the Day of Atonement to make atonement for the sin of the people. Has the Ark of the Covenant in there. 2 images of massive cherubs on each side. Their wingspan is incredible. They took some artistic liberties. There's some debate about what they would have understood the cherubs to look like. These are somewhat sphinx-like. And then we're just backing out, getting another good look at the whole structure. And then the structure you see coming up on the left here, that is what will be Solomon's temple. So as you can see, the large king's palace is within the temple complex. They're both very close.
Yeah, the book does have that. Yeah, cubits is 18 inches. Yeah, after we talked about the labor in your book, it said the temple measurements and construction materials are recorded in 1 Kings 6. The temple proper was 90 feet long, 30 feet wide, 45 feet tall. And then it talks about being ornate with gold. Okay, so yeah, hopefully that was a much better image than just seeing all the measurements laid out in the text. They did a really good job with that. Any thoughts, comments, questions that you have about anything you saw?
Be nice to see it in person.
Sure. The Babylonians saw to that, though. Yeah, they took a few artistic and theological decisions. As you saw, the cherubs looked very similar to like sphinxes with wings. That there are debates about what the cherubim would have looked like. It's kind of funny though, in that depiction, they had the sphinx-like cherubs or seraphim or whatever they think they are, like all over, but then on top of the Ark of the Covenant, they were your classic Raiders of the Lost Ark looking angels. Like they wouldn't go away from that image. But yeah, it's a academic, artistic choice that they made with the sphinx-looking ones.
Yeah, the only thing was the veil. The veil went to the Holy of Holies. And they had the door, right? But did they have the veil?
I don't know
I didn't notice.
if they do in this temple.
Yeah.
I know they put in a gold door. So in the tabernacle, there was always a veil.
Still a separation.
Yeah, so in Solomon's temple, I know they put in the gold bifurcated door. And it had the same images on it that the tabernacle's veil also had seraphim and like the plant abundance. You're kind of like back in the garden where God is. That's the idea with the temple imagery. There obviously is by the time the second temple comes along, because that's important in Matthew's gospel. I don't know about Solomon's
It was
temple.
there. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not
I don't think you read it in the description.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I don't think, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and when they built the second temple, they have to build a second temple, if you're not aware of this. Babylon destroys this temple in the 500s. And when they build the second temple, they do. It's not exactly like the first temple that they build. And they actually, we were talking about this last week, they bring in some elements from Ezekiel's temple, which is a whole prophet visionary thing. It's not exactly by any stretch Ezekiel's temple, but they clearly saw themselves as recreating at least parts of that. So the second temple is not the first temple, and they make some theological and base changes. So there's a lot going on there.
Explain about the Garden of Eden thing, with God communing with man.
Oh, okay.
So just so everybody.
Sure. So, if we're familiar with the creation story, the creation narrative in Genesis 1 through 3, really, when God creates the world, he puts man and eventually woman in the Garden of Eden. And that is the place where God dwells with man. He regularly walks in the garden. Man is in perfect harmony with everything around him. Man is in abundance, and he's in perfect communion with God. That's the idea of what's happening in Eden. And then they choose knowledge of good and evil. They take good and evil upon themselves as opposed to eating of the tree of life, following God, and they're cast out of the garden. And all the steps along the way is God's on a mission to get back into that perfect fellowship with man. So he's attempting through a long, very long plan. God's plan is to, we can say bring back Eden, but he wants to bring back something significantly better. He needs to bring man back up to his he needs to bring man back up to the state where he can have communion, God and man. So what God always wants is to be in fellowship with humankind. That's one of the reasons he made us. So all throughout you get these instances where heaven and earth meet. And the big thing with that happens at first with the tabernacle, where he says, okay, this is going to be a space, and this is how you as man can properly approach God in this heaven-earth space so we can commune together and that your sins can be forgiven. So that's what's happening in the tabernacle in the wilderness, and that's why it's filled with garden-like imagery. Everything around, all the images are celestial beings, like angelic beings, which kind of puts you in heaven, in a sense. It puts you back in the garden where there's fruit, there's trees, there's abundance, and the temple is the bigger, more permanent version of that, where God wanted in Jerusalem the place where he would put his name, the place where he would bless, the place that, for that time, it's considered that, heaven and earth once again meet in the temple, and this is where we can commune with God in the proper way. And of course, this will again point ahead to Christ as the place where God and man meet in perfect harmony in the person of Christ. And then the idea is that as you follow Christ, you trust in his sacrifice for salvation, Christ promises to give you the Holy Spirit. So once again, you become the place where God and man meet, and you're hopefully, through God's plan, brought closer and closer to the image of God through this process throughout your whole life. So really, the Bible is a story of temples, whether it was the original Eden temple, the place where man and God would meet, to the tabernacle temple, Jesus, and then, of course, Revelation leads us to the ultimate restoration of God and man living together in perfect harmony, perfect communion, without sin. So, long story short, that's one of the reasons the temple is a huge, important stop on our journey from the beginning to the end of all things, with Christ being the perfect image of this temple. Is that good?
Yeah, that's good, because it
Contextual.
that way everything is, like in a nutshell, it all makes sense. Why is it like this? Why we have all this design, decorative things, all these things, they figure into God and man and communion. Everything is good.
Yeah, and I think the more you understand the temple, the more you tend to understand, one, it puts you in the culture that the whole Bible is written within. In a lot of prophetic texts, you end up with a lot of temple imagery, and if you don't know what the temple is, you don't see it. Even Revelation, you have saints under the altar. And you're like, what altar? Is an altar where you sacrifice things? That seems weird. You go, oh, well, we have the brass altar, and that's an interesting thing too. The altar outside, that's the brass altar. That's where animals are sacrificed. Inside the holy place, where you have that altar for incense, that's made of gold. So you go, okay, so like, you have to, there's the blood sacrifice first, there's the forgiveness of sins first, and then once you enter into that space, there's the gold altar, and that's always representative of the prayers of the people and God, the communion between the two. So you end up with the forgiveness of sins first, almost like the lesser thing, that's the entry, that's just how you get in, that's the brass thing. And then once you get inside, you have the gold altar, and that's actual communion and fellowship with God. So there's symbolism all over it, and the better you understand the temple, the better you understand the people who wrote the Bible, the culture that it was spoken into, and it just helps us with a lot. So.
Does the pomegranate, does that like symbolize the fruit from the tree of goodness?
I'm not sure, because there's nowhere that explicitly states what the fruit was.
Right.
So you end up with pomegranate stuff. You end up with a lot of figs as well. I think they're more of the abundant fruit that is from the ancient Near East, or the Near East still. Figs, pomegranates, that kind of stuff. They have more of those tropical-ish fruit trees. Yeah. Okay, so good. We spent more time on the temple than I thought it would, but that's perfect. If we're going to spend time somewhere, the temple's in place. Okay. It's worth noting that, of course, how long did the temple take to build? 7 years. Seems only appropriate. Okay. So 1 Kings chapter 6. Let's actually dive into the text. We're going to start in verse 11. And the word of the Lord came to Solomon, saying, concerning this house which thou art building, if thou wilt walk in my statutes and execute judgments, and keep all my commandments to walk in them, then I will perform my word with thee, which I spoke unto thy father David. And I will dwell among the children of Israel, I will not forsake my people Israel. So Solomon built the house and finished it. So we get a quick reminder, like right before the temple's finished up. God once again just tells him, okay, just remember, you have to follow me. Like, you're doing this great work, but after that, like, keep it up, keep following me. I think he probably, obviously, as God, knows Solomon's propensity to wander into his different areas of interest, let's say. We'll get to some of that. So, actually, we don't need to discuss it too much, but question 4 is interesting. So it says, why did the Lord find it necessary to remind Solomon of his walk with the Lord? And the answer that the book gives is that it would have been easy for Solomon to get involved in the building program and forget why he was building the temple. So question 6 asks, what could happen to a believer's walk with God when the believer accomplishes something great for God? Why don't we hit on that for a second? Does anything like that ever happen? Even if you take it out of the spiritual realm?
Kind of rest on the wall.
Yeah.
Take a break. Keep it focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you ever see someone like sports team? Like, it's really common, and it's for a host of reasons, that after a football team wins the Super Bowl, like a lot of times the next year they don't even make the playoffs. And it's for a lot of reasons. Sometimes your great players retire, get drafted, contracts expire, but I think we're all familiar with the idea of like, oh, I accomplished this, and now I'm gonna coast for a while, Do you have something?
Yeah, you could do the opposite too. You could accomplish this great thing for God, and then say, hey, look what I did.
Yeah.
And then you start to put God behind you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, get proud with it.
Sure.
Or kind of like it sounds stupid, but people get the idea, at least function in a way as if God needs them. Because I do these great things for God. And they probably wouldn't even say that. Like, obviously, God needs me around. Like, no one would say that. But people act like it. It happens. So yeah, it's interesting that like kind of on the eve of, right on the edge of Solomon finishing the temple, God reminds him like, hey, if you want to keep this thing going, don't forget why you're doing this.
Really stupid question, really stupid, but so like when we start out looking at Israel looking for a king.
Yeah.
Just a king, just to manage things, just to protect them.
Mm-hmm.
At what point do they start actually looking for a Messiah?
Oh, that's a good question. So, technically, they've had the idea since Genesis, because as soon as the fall happens, as soon as the sin happens, and as they're being thrown out of the garden, there's Genesis 3:15, which basically says that there will be a seed of the woman who will crush the head of the serpent. So it's kind of understood that the tempter, the ultimate evil, the thing that caused us, in a sense, to fall while still taking responsibility, that caused us to fall, someone will be born who will crush the head of that serpent. So they've sort of been setting you up for it all along, and as the Bible goes on, they keep narrowing down. So at first it's, okay, anyone born from Eve. Like, okay, someone's going to crush the head of the serpent. Then eventually God narrows it and says, okay, humanity's not doing so hot. I'm going to work through this one person's family, the family of Abraham. And through Abraham, all nations will be blessed. And tied up in that is, through Abraham, for the benefit of all, someone's going to come that will crush the head of the serpent. So, okay, now you're all humanity's side, now the Messiah will come through Abraham. Although they didn't have words for that yet. So they're looking for the snake crusher, they're looking for the promise to be fulfilled. How we understand the Messiah, I would say it comes about more in the exile, as after centuries of kings failing, after centuries of idolatry, Babylon conquers them, they get taken into exile. Before, during, and after that, prophets are saying, God's bringing judgment, and there's tons of judgment, but then the prophet says, but God will restore his people, and there's ideas of the ultimate restoration coming, the ultimate. You start getting language of, we're going to get the ultimate Moses, the ultimate David, the ultimate restorer of our people, and this Messiah concept gets extrapolated out, especially during the exile.
It doesn't start like there's so much emphasis like physical, like the symbolism of the sacrifices.
Yeah.
Does it start with this, with the temple? Like it doesn't kick off the idea?
Oh, like of someone dying for the sins of the people? Is that what you mean?
Like, it's the whole idea of trying to, you sin and then you sacrifice.
Mhm.
Sort of like doesn't over time God kind of go, that whole thing about it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. And God's kind of like tired of forgiveness, or I want you to.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So like.
Yeah, no, I
Does
understand.
that sound?
No, I know what you mean. So, yeah, throughout this time they have the idea that sin needs to be paid for with blood. Like, that gets well established in the temple. And that,
When Christ comes, he's kind of like, he's saying, I am.
Yeah.
I am the sacrifice.
Yeah, so I think what you might be referring to is as things keep getting more and more corrupt, they're still doing the temple sacrifices, they're doing ritual stuff as they're sinning, as they're following other gods, as their heart is not like following after God, they're just keeping up with the ritual. And there are a lot of prophetic passages where God says like, I'm sick of your sacrifices because you're doing this, but you're not actually following me. You're just following some rules written down. You're not doing what I actually want. So then you get ideas that God's law needs to be brought new. It's not enough to just be laws on tables of stone. The heart needs to be changed, and all this gets worked out, especially in the prophets. Yeah. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, I feel like maybe I'm missing steps.
Well, and maybe next week it'll come together more as we talk about how the kings specifically look to Christ. That might help mend things together a little bit.
Yeah, because you see a lot more of the prophetic and everything and all the pull together when they come back. For the next temple after Babylon.
Yeah.
And so, and then even in that intertestament time, it's building.
Yeah.
When John the Baptist says, behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sin, here it is, it's the fulfillment, it's building, especially since they went back from exile.
Yeah.
And that there's an ultimate sacrifice that will remedy this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's big and complicated. We can suss it out over some time. Yeah. Okay. Where are we at? Okay. 1 Kings 7. We finished building the temple. 1 Kings 7, verse 1. But Solomon was building his own house 13 years, and he finished all of his house. So that second big structure you saw, that was Solomon's palace that he built next to the temple. So just that quick verse to get us to page 112. Should be the top of page 112. It says, Solomon's palace was a very large complex with several interconnecting buildings. The main structure was 4 times larger than the temple. It measured 150 feet by 75 feet and was 45 feet high. A covered walkway surrounding the inner patio, and there was a covered front portico measuring 75 feet long, 45 feet wide. This complex also included a large area for storing 500 shields, a judgment hall, separate buildings for Solomon and his queen, a protective wall surrounding the huge courtyard. It took almost twice as long to construct Solomon's personal residential complex as it did to build the temple. So all that about the palace. My question is, do you think that matters? So the book's pointing out it's like 4 times the size of the temple. took Solomon, he spent twice as much time on his own house. Do you think this means anything? Is this a slide into, like, ego, or is this just what it is?
I always assumed that they got the architecture for the temple. I always thought from God. I didn't think it, or somehow it was related that this is what God wanted. So
Right.
he's got a bigger house. I don't think. Myself, I don't see anything with it.
Okay.
He's doing more with his house as far as
Yeah.
being a king, all storage, you got a house and all the other stuff that goes to support things, you know what I mean? So,
It's also so interesting, God wanted to dwell in a tent, and the structure is built, it's bigger than the tent, but like it's modest by comparison to the size of the palace, so like, it sort of makes sense in that respect.
Okay. And you shook your head yes, which I'm not sure what that meant initially.
Yes. I think it's easy for Christians to look at a question like that and say, yeah, you know what, this may have symbolized a slide in his, and I don't think so. Because you notice he did that second. So he did do what God wanted him to do first.
Yeah.
So he completed it. He's the wealthiest person to ever live, even in today's standards, per ratio. He was king, his build whatever he wanted, and I don't think it had anything. I think it is what it was.
Yeah.
It was what it is.
Yeah.
I was going to say earlier, and it was a sort of a joke, but we were talking about, you didn't read about the veil, but you read about the gold door.
Yeah.
Well, because King Solomon's mines, they're pretty legendary. Some of it's fictional, some of it's not. And, I was thinking, well, hey, we can't find any fabric. We got plenty of gold. Yeah, just use that, to make the door. Because, like rich people who light their cigar with a $50 bill, that kind of thing. But that's all I got.
I get you. Okay, so,
I mean, it was huge, but it didn't have so much like gold and some brass. But it wasn't covered in gold.
That's true.
I mean, yes, the stones are true expensive, but to labor and whatever.
Yeah.
It wasn't as opulent, I guess. It was bigger, but not as showy.
Yeah, that's fair, because in the temple almost everything was covered in gold. Yeah.
Plus, imagine all the room he needed for his wives and concubines. That's sort of half joke, half not.
I don't think most of them stayed there.
I'm just saying.
he built his own Hampton Inn there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Motel 6.
Yeah. So, question 7 in the book, and this question almost doesn't work because of what was concluded around the table. So they ask, what did Solomon conclude about his house and other possessions? So if we don't really see the house as like, oh, he built the temple, but he built himself the giant palace, if that's not a huge deal and it just is what it is because the temple didn't need bedrooms and it didn't need a dining hall, and the palace would naturally be larger. But what the book is hinting at, it's telling you to read Ecclesiastes. I've given you a few Psalms over this as extra reading. If you're really looking for extra reading, since we're going to be off for 13 weeks, read Ecclesiastes. So that is the other, he wrote Proverbs, Song of Solomon, and Ecclesiastes. If you want to read a good book when you're feeling pensive and thoughtful and maybe a little morbid, read Ecclesiastes, because this discusses, okay, he has everything that the world has to offer him. He's sought out everything he possibly could, and it leaves him feeling empty. And he's just searching for meaning as he's wandering from God. He's finding that as he's not with God, nothing can fill the void, is kind of the idea.
Does that go back to your first question?
Yes. Yeah.
So Pastor's cheesesteak only helped him for 20 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what the opening questions were.
It's all that.
Yeah.
You should have fired him worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and Ecclesiastes is good because he's using, I guess, a poetic device where it usually gets translated vanity. So vanity of vanities, all is vanity. That's the famous phrase from that. And we think of vanity as the woman looking in the mirror, like, combing her hair 1,000 times, like a classic, like cartoonish version of vanity. It's a Hebrew word, hevel, which is the word for smoke. So the idea that, like, okay, the smoke rises up and then, it's gone. So if we were to do like a real technical, modern idea, maybe like transient, that's probably too technical of a term, but he's saying, everything it's just a vapor. It's just, no matter what I've built up, it's going away. The wind comes and it's gone. So Ecclesiastes is solid. Okay, let's look further down on page 112. It says, to complete the temple furnishings, according to the plan of David, Solomon hired Hiram, the most skilled artisan in the area. His specialty was working with bronze. This chapter and 2 Chronicles 3 and 4 provide an itemized list and specific details of furnishings. The capacity of laborers, the size of the bronze altar, are just two of the many details God communicated to Solomon. The inclusion of so many details helped to communicate that the temple was highly important to God, and it proved that Israel was to treat God with utmost respect. And I thought that second to last line was good, that you could think, like, why do we even need this? Like, we're not rebuilding it, we're not building it now. Why who cares in a sense, but there's so much detail. It's clearly very important that how it was built. God had a lot of specificity for it. Okay, but let's dig into the Bible more. We haven't done enough with that. 1 Kings chapter 8. So the temple is built. Solomon is going to dedicate the temple. And if you haven't noticed, it's being written a little bit out of order, like just for clarity's sake, because it talks about he built the temple, he built his palace. Now we're actually dedicating the temple. So, verse 1. Then Solomon assembled the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes and chief of the fathers of the children of Israel unto King Solomon in Jerusalem, that they might bring up the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of the city of David, which is Zion. And all the men of Israel assembled themselves unto King Solomon at the feast in the month Ethanim, which is the 7th month. And all the elders of Israel came, and the priests took up the ark. And they brought up the ark of the Lord in the tabernacle of the congregation, and all the holy vessels that were in the tabernacle, even those did the priests and the Levites bring up. And King Solomon and all the congregation of Israel that were assembled unto him were with him before the ark, sacrificing sheep and oxen that could not be numbered for multitude. And the priests brought in the ark of the covenant of the Lord unto its place, into the oracle of the house, and to the most holy place, even under the wings of the cherubim. For the cherubim spread forth their two wings over the place of the ark, and the cherubims covered the ark and the staves thereof above. And they drew out the staves, and the ends of the staves were seen out in the holy place before the oracle, and they were not seen without, and there they are unto this day. There was nothing in the ark save the 2 tablets of stone which Moses put in at Horeb, Sinai, when the Lord made a covenant with the children of Israel when they came up out of the land of Egypt. And it came to pass, when the priests were come out of the holy place, that the cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord had filled the house of the Lord. Then spoke Solomon, the Lord said that he would dwell in thick darkness. I have surely built thee a house to dwell in a settled place for thee to abide in forever. Okay. That's the beginning of him dedicating officially the temple. The ark is brought back. Did any of the imagery here make you think of anything? Did it trigger any other thoughts?
And God came down on Mount Sinai.
Yeah.
Same type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
God met Moses
Yes.
on the mountain.
Yeah, so at the end there you get that thick darkness, and when God came to meet Moses, there's a lot more than thick darkness, but there's, among other things, there's fire, there's cloud, there's smoke. And if you are familiar with the story of when Moses built the tabernacle, when that was constructed for their desert worship wandering, the same thing happens when they dedicate the temple. It gets filled with this, it's referred to as a cloud, but it's the glory of the Lord. It has the idea that it's just filled with this utter bright cloud, something that is like the radiance of God's presence in the place, shows that, okay, it's officially put together, it's here for its place, for its purpose, and God, as promised, is in the temple. He's in that meeting place with man.
Why do you suppose this is a tough question, why do you suppose God picked darkness rather than light?
That's a good
Why
question.
couldn't it have been filled with blinding light that we associate
Right.
the opposite darkness, which we associate with the devil?
Well, it's interesting that you tend to get both with God, even in the same set of images. So often God himself is the blinding light brightness, and then surrounded by a cloud. So that's what happened on Sinai. So you have earthquakes, you have thunder, you have lightning. First there's this thick cloud around the mountain, and then it says God descends in fire. So you have this crazy image.
I always think it's like a shield.
Yeah.
Like
To me,
shield,
it's
you
the
know,
veil in the temple.
Yeah, because human beings can be consumed in the glory of God, literally.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
So I always thought it was like a
Yeah.
type of thing.
right.
Maybe not that.
Well, and it's the idea that, so obviously we said that God is on a mission to redeem and restore all of creation, mankind included. So there's a sense in which, of course, God is reaching out to humanity as a whole, but there's also this sense in which, okay, like one person was allowed to go into the Holy of Holies once a year when God said it was okay. So there's this idea that no one can look upon the face of God and live unless you're Moses, and then you can talk to God face to face. So like there's this selection process where if you're actually going to come face to face, in a sense, with God, there's something required. Like God has his most manifest, abundant presence hidden behind a cloud. And it ends up, again, it's in the tabernacle, it's a veil. In the temple, it's the doors. So like there's always something that is buffering humanity from God, in a sense, and only under certain conditions, which will really, again, lead us to Christ, that you need, the priest needed that blood of the Lamb to go into the Holy of Holies where God dwelt. So there's a lot going on there. So it's not a super clear answer, but there's a lot happening.
Yeah, it's hard to predict what God was thinking.
Yeah, that seems fair. Okay, so that is the dedication of the temple. And we won't read it, but Solomon goes on to offer an extensive prayer in front of the people, and it's all about forgiveness at the temple. Expecting the people to wander, but you come back to the place of forgiveness at the temple and return to fellowship with God. So forgiveness is a really big theme in his prayer. Okay, let's look at chapter 9, verse 1. Okay. And it came to pass, when Solomon had finished the building of the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all Solomon's desire which he was pleased to do, that the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time as he appeared unto him at Gibeon. The Lord said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever. And my eyes and my heart shall be there perpetually. And if thou wilt walk before me as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and will keep my statutes and judgments, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised unto David thy father, saying, There shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. But if ye shall at all turn from following me, ye or your children, and will not keep my commandments and statutes which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them, and this house which I have hallowed for my name will I cast out of my sight. And Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. And at this house which is high, everyone that passeth by shall be astonished, and shall hiss. And they shall say, Why has the Lord done this unto his land, and to this house? And they shall answer, Because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought forth their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have taken hold upon other gods, and have worshipped them, and have served them. Therefore the Lord brought upon them all this evil. So even at the consecration of the temple, God is once again like showing, here's what can happen, and of course we know from history, here's what happened. So from the beginning, this idea is out there, and Israel just walks right into it every time. Okay, so yeah, I want to respect our time here. So there's a few things that happen. Solomon keeps building cities. He builds a lot more. He builds storehouses for his gold, and there's a lot more construction. In your book on page 114, probably closer to the bottom of the page, we see Solomon's great empire and building projects received worldwide attention, including a visit from the Queen of Sheba. She was overwhelmed by what she saw and heard. She exchanged gifts with Solomon. Her gifts included about 4.5 tons of gold, spices, and precious stones. That's a quick recap of the Queen of Sheba, this other country coming to visit. It's an enigmatic little passage where, I feel like there's something that I'm missing with, what it means that they pointed her out. This renowned leader comes, she has heard rumors of Solomon's wealth and wisdom, and she comes and kind of sits at his feet, and I think it's another symbol of the nations coming to...
The Gentile nations.
Yeah, the Gentile nations coming to learn and hear the wisdom of God. But it's just like this one little odd...
Do you think it's a real that was a woman?
It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, how many powerful queens did you have in the ancient Near East? Of course, every king had a queen, but she seemed to be the one actually running the show. Yeah, so that is unique. But yeah, that's a little thing that happens. And then chapter 10, I know we're jumping around. Chapter 10, verse 18. This doesn't particularly lend to the story, but I love this. Chapter 10, verse 18, Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory and overlaid it with the best gold. The throne had 6 steps, and the top of the throne was round behind, and there were stays on either side on the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood by the stays, and 12 lions stood there on one side and on the other upon the 6 steps, and there was none the like made in any kingdom. So he builds this massive lion throne, which I just think is the coolest thing he could have possibly done. I'm not entirely sure that I'm getting the imagery right. We could use another video on that. I don't know if he's got lions going up the steps. I don't know. Is there one on either side of him? Are they armrests? Is that what I'm getting? I don't know. But it's a crazy throne made of ivory, lions all around it. And then verse 22, they're talking about the shipping that he did. Verse 22, For the king had at sea a navy of Tarshish with the navy of Hiram. Once in 3 years came the navy of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory, and apes and peacocks. So King Solomon exceeded all the kings of the earth for riches and wisdom. And Chronicles, I think, goes into a little more detail where, he seems to have this royal zoo set up, which I just find hilarious. I think it's just a really funny detail. I'm sure it was a bigger deal back then, because we have zoos all over the place, but where do you get apes in Israel? So it's interesting. Yeah, that's a good choice. That's a good point. But
Maybe he had read Genesis, and, if I have to make another ark, I got these animals.
a very prepared man, yes.
The peacocks with beautiful feathers.
Oh, yeah.
As far as
Oh, they're definitely exotic, yeah. Right. Okay, so we need to look at the end of his reign that is less amazing, let's say. Okay, so what I want you to do is hold your spot where we are in 1 Kings, and I want you to look at Deuteronomy 17. So that's the 5th book in the Bible. So if you recall earlier when we talked about when Israel wanted a king, I had said that God had made provisions for this back in the law. So this is explaining that, hey, when you want a king, here's what you need to do. Deuteronomy 17:14. It says, "When thou art come into the land, which the Lord thy God giveth thee, and shall possess it, and shall dwell therein, and shall say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. Then thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger over thee, which is not thy brother. But he shall not multiply horses unto himself, military might, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to the end that they should multiply horses. For as much as the Lord has said unto you, ye shall not henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives unto himself, that his heart not turn away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. And it shall be when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests, the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God, and keep all the words of this law and these statutes to do them, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel." We can turn back to Kings. So those are the things that God set up. There were certain things that he was not to do, and certain things that he was supposed to do. Okay, so 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 26. Solomon gathered together chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, whom he bestowed in the cities for chariots, and with the king at Jerusalem. The king made silver to be in Jerusalem like stones, and cedar he made to be as the sycamore trees that are in the vale for abundance. Solomon had horses brought out of Egypt, and linen yarn. The king's merchants received the linen yarn at a price. And a chariot came up and went out of Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, a horse for 150, and so for all the kings of the Hittites, for the kings of Assyria, did he bring them out by their means. But King Solomon loved many strange women, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites, of the nations concerning which the Lord said unto the children of Israel, Ye shall not go in unto them, neither shall they come in unto you, for surely they will turn your hearts after their gods. Solomon clave unto these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. For it came to pass when Solomon was old, that his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not perfect with the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Zidonians, after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites, and Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord, and went not fully after the Lord, as did David his father. Then did Solomon build a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And likewise he did for all his strange wives, which he burned incense and sacrificed unto their gods. The Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, when he had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord commanded. So especially if you read the Deuteronomy text about what kings are supposed to and not supposed to do, this is a glaring indictment, a very specific turning from everything that he was supposed to do and not do, like to the letter. So he multiplied the military, specifically from Egypt. You're not supposed to have many wives. It's sort of like the reverse of his good deeds at Gibeon the first time, when he's going to sacrifice there at Gibeon, where the ark is. How many sacrifices? He did 1,000 sacrifices. He's not supposed to multiply wives. How many wives is he going to have? Well, he has 700 wives, 1,000 total. So, like, he went as far as you possibly could with it. And it had predictable results. Exactly what God warned of came to pass. So Solomon, who was initially known for building the great temple to God, starts setting up temples to other gods in Jerusalem. So we need to finish. But we can say, we can look probably at the bottom of page 115. It goes on to page 116. It says, the Lord raised up adversaries to chastise Solomon. The first was Hadad, an Edomite. When David and, Joab, decimated Edom, the boy Hadad and some of the Edomite officials fled to Egypt, where they were well received. Some years later, Hadad learned that both David and Joab were dead, so he decided to return and avenge the deaths of his countrymen. He caused Solomon considerable trouble. The second adversary the Lord raised up was Rezin, who was with a band of rebels seized Syria. He continued to trouble Solomon while he lived. The third adversary was Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials. Because he had worked well on the repair of the walls, Solomon placed him over a tribute of Ephraim and Manasseh, the house of Joseph. The prophet Ahijah met Jeroboam, and to illustrate divine judgment, tore his new coat into 12 pieces. He told Jeroboam that he would succeed Solomon and rule over the 10 northern tribes upon the king's death. Jeroboam became such an adversary that he fled to Egypt because Solomon tried to kill him. So, even though all of this happens at the end of towards the end of Solomon's reign, that's really when he starts turning away, and God sets up these adversaries in his place. And like we saw there, someone other than Solomon's son is going to succeed him. Now, because God had promised David that there would be someone on the throne in Jerusalem forever, the kingdom is divided back into the 10 tribes and 2 tribes. So Jerusalem and the small tribe of Benjamin, that gets referred, the tribe of Judah, which is where Jerusalem is, and the small tribe of Benjamin, that typically gets just called Judah. That is where the line of David continues to rule after Solomon's death. But there's a civil war situation again, and Jeroboam, a guy who was an official in Solomon's court, God has him rule over the 10 northern tribes that get just called Israel. And for a few hundred years into the future, Israel and Judah, even though they were one people, they become enemies to each other. Israel really, not having the temple in Jerusalem, Israel really goes hard into idolatry and all sorts of stuff. And Judah is only about 150 years behind them in all their steps towards wickedness. So Solomon has a really amazing start, does amazing things for God, and then seems to rest on his laurels, like you were saying earlier. He gets comfortable in his accomplishments. He gets full of himself, I guess, to an extent, to where he's multiplying wealth beyond what God called him to. He's taking wives of the people that God told him not to. The king in Deuteronomy was supposed to write out the law of God and meditate on it day and night so that his judgment was just and good. Solomon clearly failed this in the later parts of his life. And if you do have the time to read Ecclesiastes, a lot of this it doesn't get fleshed out like following other gods. He doesn't talk about that. But you just see this general loss of meaning once God is no longer the focus of his life. So that's the unfortunate end of Solomon. And I'll just read the last paragraph in our book. Solomon's reign of 40 years ended as a spiritual failure. Although greatly blessed by the Lord, he chose to use those many gifts for his own advantage and not for the glory of God. He was perhaps the most qualified person to have ever lived, but he chose not to wholly follow the Lord. However, he received an honorable burial in the city of David, the older part of Jerusalem, first captured by his father. So they still end up having great respect for him, like they seem to with all kings, and he definitely contributed more than most. even in his failing years. But we'll leave it there, and that's as far as the study goes. It takes us from Samuel to Solomon, and it still feels like a cliffhanger because you know there's several hundred more years of history, but the book is not that big in scope. So, yeah, with Solomon we see ultimate wisdom that still fails him when he doesn't follow God. So no matter what he was given, the wealth, the position, the peace that was around the country, when he didn't follow God, it still all went downhill and eventually leads to the country being torn apart after his death. So he's a great figure. We learn a lot from him, but once again, like everyone else, he fails when he turns away from God. And that's the big thing we get from Solomon. So I want to close in prayer, but any quick thoughts, questions we want to talk about before? Yeah.
Why does he not have to live in this kingdom? We call it the government. Fairness, following that. Why are you happy? I think I missed something there.
I'm not sure. I will have to look into that. I might have missed something there too.
It says it is to be bigger. They came out from Tyre, see the cities who Solomon had given, and they pleased him not.
Oh, I got you.
What was wrong with them? Was
It doesn't say anything particularly that was wrong with them,
okay.
but it almost seemed like maybe Solomon didn't give him what he felt he was due, and I don't know exactly. It seems like a Solomon problem, like maybe he, after all that Hiram had done as he helps build and architect the temple, that he wasn't actually compensated the way he should have. Yeah, and unfortunately it doesn't spend a lot of time on that. It's just a really important little like sub-character who is a big deal with the temple construction. But yeah, there's just not a lot of detail there. So.
I got the guys.
No, I don't think you did. I think
I always thought he got ripped off.
Yeah.
Because he actually helped Solomon because he was David, his father's friend.
Yeah.
And so it was like, because I was a friend of your father to do this for me.
Yeah.
And then in the end, all the work he did, I always got a sense he felt like,
Yeah, it just doesn't really like.
he gave him the second-rate cities, you know.
Maybe they were just like unworkable.
I'm trying to aggravate.
He does that now.
Okay, so yeah, like I said, next week we'll have some refreshments and we'll have a lesson that hopefully links everything we saw as much. I'm sure I'll have to pick a few key things that point ahead to ultimate fulfillment in Jesus. So that'll be
Want
one.
us to bring our book? Do we need our book, do you think, for next week, or are you okay?
We probably don't need them.
Okay.
I'm going to have a printout.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so hang on to them, do whatever you do with them. Keep them to, continually reread them, I'm sure. So, okay, let's close in prayer. Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the study. I thank you for just being able to look at this very unique period in the history of your people and see all the different things you did, all the ways you work in and through and with to people as they serve you, as they fail you, and just giving us a better, clearer picture of who you are and what you want and what your ultimate purpose is for mankind and as it relates to yourself. So I just thank you for the study. I thank you for what we've been able to learn and pray that what we've learned will continue to help and bless and edify us. And just pray you bring us back safely for the last lesson. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, thank you. Sorry. I appreciate your patience. We wanted to cover the end of that. I wanted to cover the end of that. Hopefully you did too.